Alright, our next topic is brinkmanship. When you study the Cold War, this word comes up a lot, and it's one of those words people aren't really sure what they mean sometimes. They think they might know it. Just make sure we got an understanding of the definition here, a general idea. That you get a whole huge buildup of nuclear weapons. And brinkmanship is saying, you're willing to go to the edge. You're almost telling the other guy, hey, bring it, bro. We're willing to go. We got the weapons to do it. And that threat that, one, you have enough nuclear weapons to wipe out the other guy. And two, you're willing to do it. Kind of leads to topic number 12. Which is an interesting concept. Just one more acronym you got to worry about. MAD, M-A-D. Mutually Assured Destruction. And again, brinkmanship is kind of connected to mutually assured destruction. This meant that, hey man, if you launch, we launch. If we die, you're going to die. This is like, the end of a Quentin Tarantino film. You got a bunch of guys with guns pointed at each other. Nobody wants to die, and nobody's going to put their gun down. In retrospect, during the Cold War, mutually assured destruction just seemed like, this is the most insane thing ever, right? This is crazy. In retrospect, a lot of historians have written that this is what saved us from a nuclear holocaust, actually. Knowing that the other guy could wipe you out if you launch your weapons, meant if you start World War III, you're committing suicide. So in a way, according to a lot of historians, mutually assured destruction may have actually saved us from World War III, when at the time it really felt like it was pushing us to World War III. So hopefully that makes sense. Here's another Cold War term. Make sure you know this. I'll even give you, as far as this semester goes in 2014, this is definitely on your final exam here. As is probably most of the topics here. Just make sure you understand them. But the domino theory. This, some people thought this might have been a little disingenuous or more of... again, it's a matter of opinion. But at the time, thought this was almost propaganda to get people to buy into the Cold War. Some people like the Korean War. Why are we in Korea? Which we'll cover in a minute. What do we care about Korea? Why are we in Vietnam? What do we care about Vietnam? And LBJ, Lyndon Baines Johnson, your 36th president, he becomes president after President Kennedy's assassinated. He goes on to explain the domino theory. And he's almost trying to sell it to the American public, saying, we could lose all of Indochina. If Vietnam goes, Laos goes, Cambodia goes. I'm paraphrasing, but I remember there was an LBJ speech that went something like that. So the idea was, little South Vietnam might not be a big deal, but if we just sit here and let South Vietnam fall, then Laos, Cambodia, all these other Asian countries are going to go. Next thing you know, boom, all of Asia's communist. Now all the Soviet Union's communist. Now they start looking towards Europe. Boom. Next thing you know, Europe's communist. You're going to be encircled, remember that term, by communist countries. Communism is going to take over the world. That was the idea of the domino theory. So understand what it means. Did it really happen? Well, as we'll learn in a minute, South Vietnam eventually did fall and go communist. But the whole world did not follow suit. Sorry, that one got cut off a little bit. And then, to counter what I just said, just to disagree with myself here, China does fall. And that's huge when China goes communist. Which leads us to topic 14. Now, you could spend a whole class on this. I took an entire class just on China going communist and Cultural Revolution, the Great Leap Forward, etc. But just so you know, again, this is a basic lesson. In October of 1949, communist leader Mao Zedong, he takes control of China. And this is when, yeah, see, domino theory, man, domino theory. These countries are falling. This isn't some little country here. This is the most populated country in the world. China. They just went communist. At the time, this was, a huge shift in the balance of power in the world. Mao actually used a lot of the same tactics as Stalin while he was in power. His picture was everywhere. The idea here was that peasants worked hard while the state profited. Does that sound like something you want to be a part of? Later on, there's a Cultural Revolution. At first, there's a lot of confusion with the Cultural Revolution. First, Mao was behind it. Then eventually, even Mao was like, okay, we're getting a little out of hand here. I mean, they're, college professors, they would, I'd be one of the first people killed. They'd grab me out of my class, take me outside, arrest me, and shoot me. The Cultural Revolution is put down by Mao. Just know that China did go communist, and to this day, again, this video is in 2014, China is the largest communist country in the world. When the Soviet Union ceases to exist in 91, China becomes the largest communist country in the world. Now, some would argue their economy is not exactly communist, but it is a communist country. Okay, I alluded to the Korean War. Again, another topic you could spend a whole semester on. Easy. Let's just get the basics down here. Okay, the Korean War. It's topic number 15. Sometimes referred to as the Forgotten War. I know some Korean War vets on their jackets, they have patches that'll say the Forgotten War. It's from 1950 to 1953. You had North Korea communist, which to this day is still communist. And you had South Korea. We're going to see a little basic review of this. Here's a little hint for you. 38th parallels on your final exam, or your Cold War exam, depending what class this is for. Make sure you know that Korea, after World War II, Korea was divided along the 38th parallel. This is what separated North Korea, occupied by Soviet forces, and South Korea, occupied by American forces. So you see this pattern, right? Remember East-West Berlin, Berlin Wall. Well, in Korea, you got the 38th parallel dividing it. One side's communist. You know who's backing that side. The other side's democratic. You know who's backing that side. So here's a summary of the Korean War.
Korea was divided in half, with a communist regime in the north supported by China and the Soviet Union, and a republic in the south supported by the United States and Western powers. The withdrawal of U.S. troops in January of 1950 made South Korea vulnerable to attack. On June 25, 1950, 80,000 North Korean troops surged across the border at the 38th parallel and in 3 days captured Seoul, the capital of South Korea. The United Nations promptly responded with a resolution to aid Korea. U.S. General Douglas MacArthur was appointed Commander-in-Chief of the UN forces. North Korean regulars continued to push south toward the port of Pusan, where General Walker's 8th Army fought a delaying action to defend the last major stronghold of South Korea. By August 5th, UN troops and the obstacle of the Naktong River halted their advance. The North Koreans launched violent attacks against the Pusan perimeter, but by September 12th, the offensive had exhausted itself and ground to a halt. 3 days later, MacArthur launched a daring amphibious landing at Incheon that cut off the North Korean supply lines. It was the most successful military move of his career. Seoul was retaken, and the North Koreans were forced to retreat behind the border. The UN demanded surrender. Determined to eliminate future aggression, UN forces crossed the 38th parallel on October 7th. As MacArthur advanced steadily north, the Chinese warned of possible intervention, beginning secret preparations for an offensive. Less than 2 weeks after crossing the border, UN troops captured the North Korean capital, Pyongyang. UN forces were moving swiftly. As the end of October approached, a South Korean division reached the Yalu River, the border of China. The Chinese responded quickly. By November 1st, 180,000 troops had moved south across the Yalu. MacArthur launched a counteroffensive which reached its northernmost position on November 24th. The Chinese took Chosin Reservoir and with their superior numbers pushed the UN forces into retreat. December saw the Chinese advancing steadily south, crossing the 38th parallel to take Seoul once again. General Ridgway, new commander of the 8th Army, began another offensive. Named the meat grinder by frontline troops against heavy opposition, the offensive finally halted the Chinese advance. By the end of February, UN forces reached the outskirts of Seoul, recovering lost ground. There were other struggles in the war. On April 11, 1951, President Harry S. Truman dismissed Douglas MacArthur for challenging his authority and publicly criticizing his policies, and replaced him with General Ridgway. Later the same month, UN forces regained control of Seoul. The Chinese renewed the attack, putting an army of more than 450,000 against the UN with heavy casualties. But UN forces under the new command of General James Van Fleet outmaneuvered the Chinese and pushed them north. By late June, a stalemate developed as battle lines stabilized near the 38th parallel, the original border that had been crossed a year earlier. The war dragged on for another 2 years as negotiations for peace broke down repeatedly. When the issue of the return of prisoners of war was finally resolved, offering a choice of repatriation or defection, an armistice was concluded that ended the war on July 27, 1953. Almost 1 million Chinese and over 500,000 North Koreans were killed or wounded in the war.
Topic 16, the Cuban Revolution. I think Hugh Thomas's book on Cuba, if you're interested in Cuban history. Lots been written about the Cuban Revolution. It's like many other things in history. It's all about perspective. In 1959, Fidel Castro, his brother Raul, Che Guevara, the Argentine, and a small band of guerrillas are going to take over in Cuba. They're going to oust Fulgencio Batista. Batista cooperated with the American government, American business, American mafia. I said it was all about perspective. So let's do the Cuban perspective real quick. The American mafia and businessmen, Cuba, specifically Havana, was like a party town for businessmen, military guys, mafioso types, and the American mob and American business is making tons of money. And a lot of Cubans felt like, Batista's selling us out, man. Our country, our culture, our people, we exist just, we're here just to entertain the Americans. Was their perspective. One Sam, I think it was Hugh Thomas's book, like American servicemen would come out of a bar, and everything was there for them. I mean, drugs, prostitution, whatever you wanted, you could get it. And they'd come out of a bar, and it'd be 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, and for amusement they would flick a nickel into the road, and the roads were mud, real dirty. They weren't like concrete roads. And the local Cubans would, they were living in such poverty. They would dive into the mud and get dirty and, fight each other off for that nickel. And a lot of servicemen would laugh and make jokes about that. So, that's the Cuban perspective. They felt like, man, we're being exploited. Now, from the American perspective, it was good business. You had a lot of private companies there, and they felt like, hey, we're helping the Cuban economy. We're coming here spending our money, implementing business. A lot of Cubans have jobs because of us. So don't tell me we're exploiting you. If these companies weren't here, a lot of you wouldn't have a job. We're putting food on your table. So again, it's all about perspective. The teacher's job isn't to tell you, what your opinion is. It's just try to give you as many facts as possible. You do some critical thinking, and you form your own opinion. But that being said, when Castro goes in there, he actually reached out a bit to the United States, but it didn't quite work out. He went on a college speaking tour in the United States, and when he nationalized the businesses, he pretty much was declaring the U.S. his enemy.